Before we begin, tell me something in the comments. How old are you? Where are you from? Are you currently in a relationship, or is there someone you cannot stop thinking about? Maybe your story will help someone else feel a little less alone today. And if you enjoy meaningful stories like this one, a subscription helps this channel continue creating more of them. If the person who ruined your life showed up at your door at 4 o'clock in the morning, would you let her in? 2 years ago, I would have laughed at that question. 1 year ago, I would have slammed the door without hesitation. But at exactly 4:03 a.m. on a cold October morning in Vermont, I found myself staring through the narrow glass panel beside my front door, unable to move. My name is Harper Bennett. I am 42 years old, and for a long time I believed I had everything figured out. I had spent nearly 2 decades climbing the corporate ladder. I worked longer hours than anyone I knew. I missed holidays, birthdays, and more than a few relationships because I believed success required sacrifice. Eventually, that sacrifice paid off. I became one of the most respected strategy executives at Hale Dynamics, a company worth billions of dollars. People whispered that I was the future of the organization. Some even said I might become chief executive officer one day. Then everything collapsed. One announcement. One press conference. One decision made by a woman I trusted more than anyone else in the company. Victoria Hale. Chief Executive Officer. Visionary leader. Media darling. The woman who publicly blamed me for a financial scandal I had nothing to do with. I still remember standing under bright studio lights while reporters shouted questions from every direction. I remember seeing my name in headlines. I remember watching my career disappear in less than a week. And I remember Victoria saying absolutely nothing to stop it. After that, I left Boston. I left the corporate world. I moved to a small town where nobody cared about stock prices or executive rankings. I rebuilt my life piece by piece. It was quieter, smaller, simpler. Most days, I convinced myself I preferred it that way. Then came the knocking. 3 sharp knocks against my front door. Not loud, not desperate. Deliberate. The digital clock on my nightstand read 4:03 a.m. I pulled on a sweater and walked through the dark house. Outside, wind rattled the maple trees lining my driveway. The porch light illuminated a single figure standing in the cold. My stomach dropped instantly. Blonde hair. Black coat. Familiar posture. For a moment, I honestly thought I was dreaming. Victoria Hale stood on my front porch as if the last 2 years had never happened. She looked different. Tired. Pale. Older somehow. Yet there was no mistaking her. Every ounce of anger I had spent years burying came rushing back at once. My hand tightened around the doorknob. Victoria looked directly at me through the glass. Neither of us spoke. Then she raised her eyes and said 6 words that changed everything. Harper, you are in serious danger. For a moment, I simply stared at her. The wind moved through the trees behind her, carrying dry leaves across the porch. Victoria stood completely still, her expression unreadable beneath the pale glow of the porch light. 2 years of anger rose inside me so fast it almost made me dizzy. You have a lot of nerve showing up here, I said. My voice sounded sharper than I expected. Harper, please. No, I shook my head. You do not get to show up in the middle of the night and start giving warnings. Victoria looked exhausted. Not the carefully composed executive the business world knew. The woman standing on my porch looked like someone who had not slept in days. Under different circumstances, I might have felt sympathy. Instead, I felt rage. Do you remember the last time I saw you? I asked. Because I do. She lowered her eyes briefly. I remember. Good. I stepped closer to the door. Then you remember standing in front of cameras while my career was being destroyed. Harper, you remember doing absolutely nothing. The silence that followed felt heavy. Victoria did not defend herself. She did not argue. Somehow, that made everything worse. I came because you need to listen to me. No, I opened the door just enough to be heard clearly. What I need is for you to leave. A flicker of frustration crossed her face. You are not understanding the situation. The situation? I laughed bitterly. The situation is that you ruined my life. For a second, something painful appeared in her eyes. Gone almost immediately. Everything you believe happened is not the truth. The sentence landed harder than I expected. Not because I believed her. Because part of me had spent 2 years wondering if there were pieces missing from the story. I hated that thought. I hated that she could still make me question things. Go home, Victoria. I cannot. Why? Another pause. Then she glanced toward the dark road beyond my driveway. The movement was small, but I noticed it. She looked concerned. Actually concerned. Because if I leave right now, I do not know if I will have another chance to talk to you. My stomach tightened. What does that mean? It means someone is asking questions about you. Who? I do not know yet. That is not an answer. It is the only one I have. I stared at her. The entire conversation felt surreal. 2 years ago, Victoria Hale controlled a billion-dollar corporation. Now she stood outside my small Vermont house at 4 in the morning talking like someone running from a problem she could not explain. You expect me to trust you? I asked quietly. No, her answer came instantly. I expect you to remember that I never drove 500 miles in the middle of the night for no reason. The number caught my attention before I could stop myself. 500 miles. She had actually driven from Boston. The realization annoyed me more than it should have. That is your problem, not mine. Victoria nodded slowly. Maybe. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The wind continued moving through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Then headlights appeared at the far end of the road. Both of us turned automatically. A dark vehicle passed the entrance to my driveway without slowing down. Victoria watched it until it disappeared. Her jaw tightened slightly. I should go. The sudden change surprised me. I thought you said I was in danger. I do. Then explain it. Not here. She looked directly at me. Tomorrow morning. The Maple Street Cafe. 9 o'clock. Why would I come? For the first time since arriving, Victoria gave a faint, tired smile. Because despite everything, you still want answers. She turned and walked toward her car before I could respond. A minute later, her taillights disappeared into the darkness. I locked the door and stood alone in the silent house. Then I looked at the clock. 4:21 in the morning. And for the first time in 2 years, I found myself thinking about Victoria Hale again. I did not sleep. I tried. Around 5 in the morning, I made coffee and sat by the kitchen window watching darkness slowly give way to dawn. By 6:30, I was still replaying every word Victoria had said. By 7, I was angry with myself for even thinking about her. By 8:30, I was driving toward Maple Street Cafe. I told myself I was going because I wanted answers. The truth was more complicated. Part of me needed to know whether the woman who had destroyed my career was lying. The cafe sat on the corner of a quiet street lined with old brick buildings and maple trees turning shades of red and gold. It smelled like fresh coffee and cinnamon when I stepped inside. Victoria was already there. Of course she was. She sat alone near the back window with a cup of black coffee in front of her. No assistants. No security. No expensive executive entourage. Just Victoria. For a second, she looked almost like a stranger. Then she glanced up and our eyes met. The familiar feeling returned immediately. Trust broken. Questions unanswered. Years of resentment compressed into a single moment. You came, she said. Do not sound surprised. I sat across from her. You have 10 minutes. Victoria nodded. Fair enough. For several seconds, she seemed to choose her words carefully. That alone caught my attention. The Victoria I remembered rarely hesitated. 3 weeks ago, she finally said, someone accessed archived internal records connected to the investigation that ended your career. My stomach tightened. What investigation? The financial scandal. I laughed bitterly. The scandal I supposedly caused? Her expression remained steady. The scandal you were blamed for. The distinction hit me immediately. Interesting choice of words. Because they matter. A waitress appeared and asked for my order. I requested coffee. Neither of us spoke until she walked away. Then Victoria slid a small folder across the table. Look. I opened it cautiously. Inside were printed reports, access logs, and several pages filled with timestamps. Most of it looked technical. One name appeared repeatedly. Daniel Mercer. I recognized it instantly. Daniel had been a senior board member 2 years ago. Powerful. Influential. Ambitious. Why am I looking at this? I asked. Because Daniel Mercer requested access to records nobody had touched in nearly 2 years. That does not explain why you showed up at my house. Victoria leaned forward slightly. 3 days after he accessed those records, 2 former employees connected to the investigation disappeared from public view. I frowned. What does that mean? One resigned unexpectedly. The other hired legal representation and stopped speaking to anyone. People hire lawyers every day. Not because they are afraid. The certainty in her voice unsettled me. I looked back at the documents. You think Daniel is doing something? I know he is. Then go to the authorities. A shadow crossed her face. It is not that simple. Why not? She hesitated. Another unusual thing for Victoria Hale. Then she looked away toward the window. Because some of the people involved still have influence. The answer felt incomplete. Deliberately incomplete. You are not telling me everything. No, at least she was honest. Not yet. My coffee arrived. I wrapped my hands around the warm cup and studied her. Victoria looked tired. More tired than the woman who had appeared on my porch. There were faint circles beneath her eyes. The kind people accumulated after carrying a burden too long. Then something on her wrist caught my attention. A silver bracelet. Simple. Elegant. Familiar. My heart skipped unexpectedly. 2 years ago, during a company retreat in Maine, I had given that bracelet to Victoria as a joke after she won a charity auction she never wanted to attend. She had laughed and called it the most impractical gift she had ever received. Yet somehow she was still wearing it. After everything that had happened. After 2 years. The sight made no sense. Victoria followed my gaze and immediately lowered her sleeve, hiding the bracelet. The movement was quick enough to feel automatic. Harper. Her voice pulled me back. There is something else you need to know. I looked up. Her expression had changed completely. Whatever came next, it was important. Daniel Mercer is coming to Vermont. The words settled over the table like a sudden drop in temperature. Daniel Mercer is coming to Vermont. I stared at Victoria, waiting for some explanation that would make the statement less absurd. None came. Why? I asked. That is what I am trying to find out. You expect me to believe a former board member from a billion-dollar corporation suddenly decided to visit a town with fewer people than one Boston apartment building? Victoria remained calm. No. I expect you to believe that people do not spend weeks digging through sealed records unless they have a reason. I leaned back in my chair. Everything about this felt impossible. 2 years ago, Daniel Mercer had been one of the most powerful people in the company. He attended charity galas, appeared on business television, and spent most of his time discussing acquisitions and growth forecasts. The idea that he was somehow connected to my quiet life in Vermont made no sense. You still have not explained why any of this involves me. Victoria looked down at the documents between us. Because your name appears in places it should not. What does that mean? It means someone recently requested files connected to you, your termination, and the internal investigation. My stomach tightened. Requested from who? Several sources. That is not an answer. I know. Frustration flashed across her face. For the first time, she looked less like a former chief executive officer and more like someone struggling to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. We sat in silence for a few seconds. Around us, people chatted over coffee and breakfast sandwiches. A young couple laughed near the counter. An older man read a newspaper by the window. The normality of the scene made our conversation feel even stranger. Finally, I pushed the folder back toward her. Let us pretend I believe all of this. What exactly are you asking me to do? Victoria folded her hands. Be careful. I laughed. That is your plan. For now. You drove 500 miles for that? Her expression softened slightly. No, then what? Another pause. Another hesitation. I was beginning to notice how often that happened whenever the conversation approached something personal. I needed to see myself. The answer caught me off guard. Why? For a second, she looked as though she might actually tell me. Then the familiar wall returned. Because I could not risk a phone call. I almost rolled my eyes. That sounds dramatic. Maybe. She glanced toward the front windows. Her attention sharpened instantly. The change was subtle, but impossible to miss. Do not turn around immediately. My pulse quickened. Why? Because someone has been sitting in the blue SUV across the street for the last 15 minutes. Every muscle in my body tensed. You are joking. I wish I was. Against my better judgment, I resisted the urge to look. How do you know? Because it followed me from the hotel. The statement landed hard. You are serious. Very. Suddenly, the cafe felt different. Smaller. The harmless conversations around us faded into the background. I became aware of every reflection in every window. Every person entering and leaving. Every passing car. Victoria remained completely composed. That bothered me almost as much as the situation itself. How long has this been happening? I asked quietly. About a week. And you waited until now to tell me? A shadow crossed her face. I was hoping I was wrong. Are you? She held my gaze. No, the certainty in her voice sent a chill through me. A moment later, her phone vibrated on the table. She glanced at the screen and immediately frowned. What? I asked. Victoria did not answer right away. Instead, she read the message twice. Then she slowly placed the phone face down. Victoria. Her eyes met mine. Whatever confidence she had shown all morning disappeared. Harper, she said quietly, I think someone just entered your house. For a second, I forgot how to breathe. What? The word barely escaped my mouth. Victoria did not look away. A security contact in Boston has access to a monitoring service connected to several properties involved in the old investigation. My house was never involved in the investigation. I know. Then how would they know someone entered it? Victoria picked up her phone again and turned the screen toward me. A short message filled the display. Motion detected. Front entry. Residence occupied. Timestamp, 9:17 a.m. My stomach dropped. That is impossible. I hope it is. Every rational explanation rushed through my mind. A delivery driver. A neighbor. A false alert. Anything except what Victoria clearly believed. I locked the door when I left. Good. And nobody has a key. Victoria nodded slowly. That is also good. You are not helping. For the first time all morning, a faint smile appeared on her face. It vanished almost immediately. Sorry. The brief moment of normality somehow made everything feel more unsettling. I looked toward the window. The blue SUV was still parked across the street. What do we do? The question surprised me. 2 hours earlier, I would never have asked Victoria Hale for help with anything. Now she was the only person in the room who seemed to understand what was happening. We go back to your house. Just like that. Yes. That sounds reckless. Probably. She stood and reached for her coat. But I would rather verify the situation than speculate about it. 20 minutes later, we were driving through winding Vermont roads beneath a sky filled with low gray clouds. The autumn landscape blurred past the windows. Red barns. Stone walls. Fields covered in fallen leaves. Normally, the drive calmed me. Today, it felt endless. Victoria drove in silence for most of it. Her attention never seemed to leave the road. I studied her profile occasionally when she was not looking. The strange thing was that she appeared genuinely worried. Not for herself. For me. The realization made me uncomfortable. Can I ask you something? I finally said. You usually do. Why are you really here? Her hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. I told you. No, I shook my head. You told me pieces. Victoria was quiet for several seconds. Because if something happens and I do nothing this time, I will not be able to live with myself. The answer settled heavily between us. Before I could ask what she meant by this time, we turned onto my road. My house appeared ahead through the trees. Small. White. Familiar. And completely ordinary. Relief flooded through me immediately. Everything looked normal. The front porch was empty. The windows were intact. No signs of trouble. See? I said. False alarm. Victoria slowed the car but did not respond. Her eyes remained fixed on the house. Then she pointed toward the front porch. Harper. My confidence vanished instantly. The front door stood slightly open. Only a few inches. But I knew with absolute certainty that I had locked it before leaving. Victoria parked the car without taking her eyes off the house. Neither of us moved. Then she spoke softly. That, she said, is exactly what I was afraid of. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The front door remained slightly open, swaying almost imperceptibly in the breeze. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it. Maybe I forgot to close it, I said, even though I knew that was not true. Victoria did not answer. Her attention remained fixed on the house. Then she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. Who are you calling? I asked. Someone I trust. You trust people? The joke slipped out before I could stop it. To my surprise, one corner of her mouth lifted briefly. A very small number. She sent a short message and put the phone away. What now? Now we go inside. That sounds like a terrible idea. Probably. She opened the car door. I followed a moment later. The air felt colder than it had an hour earlier. Dry leaves skittered across the driveway as we walked toward the porch. Every step made me more aware of how vulnerable I suddenly felt. This house had been my refuge. My escape from headlines, boardrooms, and betrayal. Seeing the door hanging open made it feel unfamiliar. Victoria reached the porch first. She examined the lock without touching it. No damage, she said quietly. What does that mean? It means whoever came in either had a way to open it or did not need to force it. That answer did not improve my mood. I stepped inside first. The living room looked normal. The couch sat where it always had. Books remained on the shelves. Nothing appeared broken or disturbed. Sunlight filtered through the windows exactly as it had that morning. See? I said. Nothing happened. Victoria closed the door behind us and looked around carefully. Maybe. We checked room after room. The kitchen. The guest room. The small office where I handled freelance consulting work. Everything seemed untouched. Relief slowly began replacing fear. I felt slightly ridiculous for letting myself panic. Then I walked into the bedroom. My relief vanished instantly. One drawer of my nightstand stood open. Not wide. Just enough to notice. I stopped moving. Victoria. She appeared in the doorway a second later. What is it? I pointed. I closed that before I left. Victoria crossed the room and looked inside the drawer. Nothing valuable was missing. A few old photographs. A notebook. Random personal items. Yet somebody had clearly looked through them. This is getting strange, I whispered. Victoria picked up the notebook and handed it to me. What is this? Just notes. I flipped through the pages automatically. Then I froze. A folded piece of paper slipped from between two pages and landed on the floor. I had never seen it before. My hands suddenly felt cold. Victoria bent down and picked it up before passing it to me. The paper contained only a single sentence. No signature. No explanation. No threat. Just 7 words written in neat black ink. We know what really happened, Harper. I stared at the message. My pulse accelerated. This was not here before. I believe you. The simplicity of her response somehow made it more frightening. Whoever entered my house had not taken anything. They had left something. A message. A reminder. Proof that they wanted me to know they had been there. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, Victoria exhaled slowly. Now do you understand why I came? I looked up at her. For the first time since she arrived in Vermont, I did. This was bigger than old resentment. Bigger than my career. Bigger than the scandal that had driven me away 2 years ago. Somewhere, someone was reopening a story that should have been buried. And somehow, my name remained at the center of it. Then Victoria's phone vibrated again. She glanced at the screen and her expression changed immediately. What? I asked. She looked directly at me. The person I contacted found something. About Daniel Mercer? Victoria nodded once. About where he was yesterday. My stomach tightened. And? She took a slow breath. Harper, yesterday morning Daniel Mercer was in Boston. She paused. Yesterday afternoon, he was less than 20 miles from your house. For a long moment, Neither of us spoke. 20 miles. The number echoed in my head as though repeating it would somehow make it less disturbing. Daniel Mercer had been 20 miles from my house. Not from Boston. Not from a corporate office. Not from some conference center. From my house. Why? I asked quietly. Victoria looked almost as frustrated as I felt. That is still the question. She slipped her phone back into her pocket and walked toward the living room window. Outside, the afternoon sky had darkened beneath thick gray clouds. Vermont weather always seemed capable of changing its mind without warning. There is something else, she said. Of course there is. My attempt at humor fell flat. Victoria turned toward me. The person tracking Daniel found a meeting. A meeting with who? That part is unclear. You keep saying things are unclear. Because they are. Her patience sounded strained. I would rather tell you uncertainty than pretend I know more than I do. I stared at her for several seconds. Then I realized something uncomfortable. 2 years ago, the old Victoria would have delivered answers with complete confidence whether she had them or not. The woman standing in my living room seemed different. More cautious. More honest. The realization unsettled me. What are you thinking? She asked. That I do not recognize you anymore. A faint sadness crossed her face. That makes 2 of us. Silence followed. My eyes drifted toward the note still resting on the kitchen counter. We know what really happened, Harper. 7 simple words. Whoever left them knew exactly how to get my attention. Maybe they want me scared. Probably. Maybe they want me to contact someone. Also possible. Maybe this has nothing to do with Daniel Mercer. Victoria shook her head. I do not believe that. Why? She hesitated. Then she walked toward her coat and removed a thin manila envelope from an inside pocket. Because I found this 3 days ago. She handed it to me. Inside were copies of old internal company emails. At first, they looked ordinary. Scheduling notes. Financial reviews. Executive communications. Then I noticed the dates. They all came from the months leading up to the scandal that destroyed my career. Where did you get these? Anonymous source. Anonymous. Victoria nodded. The same source who warned me someone was reopening the investigation. I flipped through the pages. One email stopped me cold. My name appeared in a chain of messages between senior executives and board members. Except something was wrong. The wording did not sound like me. Not exactly. Similar enough to pass casual inspection. Different enough to feel artificial. This was altered. Victoria's eyes narrowed slightly. You see it too? Of course I do. I looked up. You are saying evidence was fabricated. I am saying someone wanted certain records to tell a specific story. My pulse accelerated. And that story ended with me taking the blame. Victoria nodded once. The room suddenly felt smaller. For 2 years I had lived with the certainty that I had been betrayed. Now that certainty was beginning to crack. Not disappear. Not yet. But crack. Why are you showing me this now? I asked. Her expression softened. Because you deserve the truth. The answer landed harder than I expected. Before I could respond, a loud knock echoed through the house. Both of us froze instantly. One knock. Then another. Deliberate. Controlled. Not a neighbor. Not a delivery driver. Something about it felt intentional. Victoria's posture changed immediately. Every trace of vulnerability vanished. Were you expecting anyone? She asked. No, the knocking came again. 3 steady taps against the front door. Neither of us moved. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked toward the entryway. Then a voice called from outside. Calm. Familiar. And completely unexpected. Harper? It is Daniel Mercer. I think we need to talk. The room went completely silent. For a moment, I honestly wondered if I had imagined the voice. Then the knock came again. Calm. Patient. Almost polite. Harper. Daniel called. Please. This is important. I looked toward Victoria. She looked toward me. Neither of us appeared remotely prepared for this. You said he was dangerous, I whispered. I said he was involved. That is not exactly reassuring. Victoria exhaled slowly. No, it is not. Another knock echoed through the house. We cannot stand here forever, I said. Agreed. For a second, I expected Victoria to stop me. Instead, she simply nodded. Whatever happens, listen carefully. I walked toward the front door. My pulse felt impossibly loud. Every instinct told me this situation should not be happening. Yet, somehow Daniel Mercer stood on my porch in the middle of rural Vermont asking for a conversation. I opened the door. Daniel looked older than I remembered. His hair had gone almost completely gray. The confidence he once carried into every boardroom seemed diminished somehow. More importantly, he looked tired. Deeply tired. His eyes immediately moved past me toward Victoria standing in the living room. Victoria. The single word carried years of history. Victoria's expression hardened. Daniel. Neither sounded happy to see the other. Daniel stepped inside after I moved aside. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The tension in the room felt almost physical. Finally, Daniel looked at me. You received the note. You left it. He nodded. Yes. My stomach tightened. You broke into my house. No, his answer came instantly. I had permission. I laughed in disbelief. From who? From the person who still legally owns the property records connected to the trust. Silence. I stared at him. What are you talking about? Daniel looked confused. Then his attention shifted toward Victoria. Something changed in his expression immediately. Not anger. Not surprise. Understanding. You never told her. The room suddenly felt very small. Told me what? Neither answered right away. Daniel rubbed a hand across his face. This is exactly why I wanted to speak with you alone. Victoria crossed her arms. You lost the right to make requests years ago. And you lost the right to keep lying. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. My eyes immediately moved to Victoria. Lying. Victoria looked away. That frightened me more than anything else that had happened. Harper, she said quietly, it is more complicated than that. Then simplify it. Daniel stepped forward. 2 years ago, the board needed someone to take responsibility for the financial scandal. I know that. No, his voice remained calm. You know the version they told you. I felt my pulse accelerating again. Then tell me the real version. Daniel looked directly at me. The evidence against you is fabricated. The room fell silent. Even though Victoria had already shown me signs of that possibility, hearing someone else say it out loud made it real in a way it had never been before. Why? I asked. Daniel's answer came immediately. Because the actual target was Victoria. I turned toward her so fast my neck hurt. What? Victoria closed her eyes briefly. Just briefly. Then she opened them again. Harper, no, I shook my head. No. Start talking. Daniel continued before she could answer. Several board members wanted control of the company. Removing Victoria directly would have caused too many questions. So they built a case around someone close to her. Me. Yes. The realization hit me like a wave. Every memory from that year suddenly felt different. Every meeting. Every accusation. Every headline. You knew. I asked Victoria. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Yes. How long? From the beginning. I stared at her. 2 years of anger, confusion, and heartbreak collided all at once. Then why did you let it happen? For the first time since she arrived at my house, Victoria looked completely vulnerable. Because the alternative would have destroyed your life forever. Daniel shook his head slowly. And that, he said, is the part she still refuses to explain. I could not speak. For 2 years, I had carried a simple story in my head. Victoria betrayed me. Victoria sacrificed my career. Victoria chose her company over me. Now that story was falling apart piece by piece. Explain it, I said. My voice sounded distant, even to me. Victoria looked at Daniel briefly before turning back toward me. The board did not want a resignation. Her eyes never left mine. They wanted criminal accusations. I felt the air leave my lungs. What? The evidence they created was designed to connect financial misconduct directly to executive leadership. Daniel nodded grimly. If Victoria had been named publicly, federal investigators would have become involved immediately. And? Victoria swallowed. And they planned to make sure you were connected to it as well. The room fell silent. That does not make sense. It does when you understand the objective, Daniel said. They needed leverage. You were the person Victoria trusted most. The easiest way to destroy her was to destroy both of you. I stared at the floor for several seconds. Every memory from that terrible year resurfaced. Every meeting. Every warning. Every strange conversation that had never quite made sense. Then another memory appeared. The silver bracelet. The one Victoria still wore. The one she had hidden beneath her sleeve in the cafe. Suddenly I looked up. You knew I was innocent. Victoria's eyes filled with a sadness I had never seen before. From the first day. And you still stood there while they blamed me. Pain flashed across her face. Because I negotiated the only deal that protected you. Daniel exhaled slowly. The board agreed to stop pursuing criminal allegations if Harper accepted responsibility for procedural failures and left the company. My heart pounded. You traded my career. To save your future. Victoria's voice broke slightly. I knew you could rebuild a career. I could not risk them destroying your entire life. For the first time, I understood the difference. The headlines had been humiliating. Losing my profession had been devastating. But criminal accusations would have followed me forever. Suddenly the hatred I had carried for 2 years felt heavier than ever. Not because it remained. Because it no longer fit. Why did you never tell me? I whispered. Victoria laughed softly, but there was no joy in it. Because part of the agreement required silence. For 2 years. For as long as necessary. Daniel stepped forward. The people responsible believed the evidence had been buried permanently. That changed when someone started reopening old records. I looked at Victoria. So when you appeared at my door, I had just learned the agreement was collapsing. Her eyes glistened slightly beneath the afternoon light. And the first thing I thought about was you. Silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable silence. Something else. The kind that appears when the truth finally arrives after years of confusion. Daniel eventually cleared his throat. The board members responsible are already under investigation. Their influence is disappearing. The truth is coming out. I nodded slowly. The strange thing was that I barely cared anymore. For 2 years, I thought I needed revenge. Standing there, I realized what I actually needed was understanding. Daniel left shortly afterward. The moment the front door closed behind him, the house became quiet again. Victoria stood near the window looking out at the falling leaves. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I walked closer. You should have told me. I know. I would have listened. Victoria smiled sadly. I was not sure about that. To my surprise, I laughed. Fair. The tension that had defined every interaction between us finally began to fade. Outside, the clouds were breaking apart. Sunlight spilled across the Vermont hills. It felt like the first clear day after a very long storm. 6 months later, the investigation officially cleared my name. The public record was corrected. Several former board members disappeared from the business world entirely. Victoria resigned from Hale Dynamics and walked away from the company she had spent years building. A month after that, she called me. Not as a chief executive officer. Not as the woman I once blamed for everything. Just as Victoria. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Then another followed. Then another. Some stories end with revenge. Ours ended with truth. And sometimes the truth changes everything. If this story touched your heart, comment the number 8.